Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this virtual workshop on family-based treatment. Tonight's workshop is brought to you in collaboration with the Eating Disorder Foundation and EQUIP. My name is Sabrina. I'm the program director at the Eating Disorder Foundation in Denver, Colorado, and I'm happy to introduce our speaker this evening and help answer moderate some of the questions. So a little bit about the Eating Disorder Foundation and EQUIP. At EDF, our mission is to be an effective resource in the prevention and elimination of eating disorders through education, support, and advocacy. And though we're located in Denver, Colorado, we're very proud to be available on an international level at this time. We are not treatment, rather we try our best to help connect people with professional providers and offer support groups and accessible support and family care. I want to take a moment to thank everybody who was able to provide a donation towards this evening's event. Thank you so much. Every amount truly does help EDF as a nonprofit expand our services. Our speaker tonight is from EQUIP. EQUIP makes gold standard eating disorder care accessible to all people through family-based treatment delivered at home for lasting recovery. Created by experts in the field and people who have been there, EQUIP builds upon this model of care by providing families with a dedicated 5-person care team, including a therapist, dietitian, physician, and peer and family mentors. If you have additional questions about EQUIP, as I'm sure you're going to, we're going to learn some tonight. I'm going to post a contact in the chat for EQUIP's Community Partners Senior Manager, Jessica Hickman. So in a moment, you'll receive Jessica's email. And if you'd like to reach out for further information about EQUIP services, she'll be your point of contact. All right, as far as this evening's workshop, I'd also like to invite you to use the chat feature to send in any questions that you have. Those questions will come to me, and then I'll be delivering them to our presenter, Erin, about 10 or 15 minutes near the end of the presentation. All right, now I'm very excited to introduce our speaker. Dr. Erin Parks is the co-founder, chief clinical officer, and chief operating officer of EQUIP. She is a clinical psychologist, researcher, and former director of the leading UC San Diego Eating Disorder Center. Erin has over 15 years of experience with adolescents and adults in inpatient, partial hospitalization, and intensive outpatient settings. And Erin opened the first pediatric eating disorder program. Erin has led dozens of national and international trainings in evidence-based eating disorder treatment and is very passionate about improving access to quality care. Dr. Parks, thank you so much for your time today. I am so looking forward to learning from you, and we'll pass the microphone over.
Sounds great. I'm really excited to be here. A huge thank you to EDF for inviting EQUIP to be here today. First of all, it's always so, awkward and humbling a bit hearing your bio read to you. So just want a few quick things. So yes, as Sabrina said, I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I actually spent my first 10 years as a neuroimaging researcher. And then after giving birth to my first son, I was off cycle for fellowship and kind of fell into the eating disorder world and was so fortunate to get to do my fellowship at UC San Diego's Eating Disorder Center. I was a director there, not the director there. There was lots of amazing people that are running and leading that program. And so just for those of you who know them, just wanted to make sure we all knew that. But really just had this awesome opportunity to be trained someplace that valued parents, that recognized the really important role of family. And that really shaped me as a clinician, as a researcher. And when I started seeing what it was that I wanted to do, what I thought more people needed was a little bit more family involvement. So I'm going to share my screen and talk today about all the different ways that family can be involved. So let me see our share screen. I'm also talking into my into my phone because we have rain in Southern California. It does not happen very often, but when it does, the whole city kind of goes bananas and doesn't know what to do. I'm from Minnesota, where I know how to drive in the snow, so this 1/4 inch of rain doesn't really bother me, but so that's why. So sorry if my voice and my video don't always sync. So I want to talk about how we treat eating disorders with families. And first, just a huge reminder that family means whatever family is to you. So for some people, this might be a biological mom and a biological dad. But for other people, it can include 2 dads, 2 moms, single parent, aunts, uncles, grandparents, also chosen family, spouses, loved ones, best friends, roommates. So if we're going to talk really broadly about family, I'm going to start kind of narrow, thinking about parents with adolescents, and then we'll kind of branch out from there. So I want to talk about the benefits of family involvement in treatment, understand the foundation of FBT, and also what we're doing at Equip and how you can do it as well. Identify who's a good candidate for having family involved, and learn different ways to involve family. So the important thing to remember about families is that, and I'm a parent myself, we're always balancing 3 competing values. We value our children's education, full stop. But we also really value our children's health. And oftentimes we have to decide which value we're going to prioritize. Are we going to pull them out of school for a therapy session at 11 a.m.? Are we going to take them out of school altogether to go away to treatment? When your child is sick with an eating disorder, in addition to balancing how you value your child's health and how you value your child's education, you're also thinking about your own relationship with your child. And this is true for other family members as well, be it with a sibling, as a grandparent. How can I honor how much I value this relationship while they're telling me, I don't want you to be involved in treatment, or it's none of your business? And that's really, really tough. How do you help them with their health and hold on to relationship? Historically, what we've seen is that many parents have said, I value their education, I value their health, and I value my relationship with my child so much, I'm going to stay out of their business. We hear this from spouses as well. I'm going to stay out of their business. And I think that was well-intentioned. They have this belief that if I'm involved in my child's recovery, or I'm involved in my loved one's recovery, I'm going to make things worse. But we actually know that that's not true. Now, it's going to feel that way. It's going to feel that way because 100% of teenagers will say they don't want their parents involved in treatment. And even as we get older, I think a little bit in our culture, we're taught you should get better on your own. You should work on recovery on your own. But really, we need to bring other people in to help us. Let's kind of steer away from eating disorders for a second and just think about depression. If you were depressed, it'd be really hard to do anything, let alone get out of bed. And you might go to individual therapy where your therapist tells you, you know, what you should be doing is getting some fresh air and going on a walk. Well, when you're depressed, it's really hard to do those things. So it'd be helpful if your family, whether that's your spouse or your sister or your parents, or your best friend, is coming to treatment with you and having the therapist say to them, hey, Erin's going to not want to get out of bed because her depression is pretty severe, but you're going to still go over to her house every day and tell her it's time to get out of bed. We got to go. We're going to go on a walk. Same thing is true with helping people get through an eating disorder. They might say that they don't want you there, but it's important to be there. We did a study, I think back in 2016, that asked people, before you started treatment, how much did you want your parents involved? And none of them wanted their parents involved. 100% of teens said, I don't want my parents involved. And their most common reason, the parents thought the reason was going to be because it's none of my business. But what the teens told us by and large is they felt really bad. And they're like, I already feel bad that my parents are having to spend so much time and money on my illness. It would make me feel even more guilty if I'm then having them have to come to treatment with me. Also, they say, I feel really bad. My parents don't know how bad it is. I don't want them in treatment because I don't want to worry them. I don't want them to see how bad it is. When parents heard that, it made them realize, wait, I thought I wasn't going to be involved in treatment and that it would be a good thing, that I wasn't going to be like getting up in their business. But when I realized that they don't want me involved in treatment because they don't want me to be sad, or they don't want me to worry, or they don't want to burden me, well, I'm their parent. I'm always going to worry about them. I am here for the burden. It's not a burden to be there for my child. This same group of people, about 50 people, who were asked at the beginning of treatment, do you want your parent to be involved? And they all said no. At the end of treatment, they said, "Are you glad that your parent was involved?" And all but one said, "I am so glad that my parent was involved." They also said things like, "I don't think I would have recovered at all if it weren't for my family being involved. I don't think that I would have recovered as fast." And also about 60% said, "I wish my parents had gotten involved earlier." So whether you are a provider or a parent yourself or a patient going through an eating disorder, please remember that you can balance all three of these competing values at the same time. And that even though it feels like it might hurt a relationship to have family be involved in your treatment, the data shows that in the long run, it strengthens your relationship. So before I say the acronym FBT too many times, or family-based treatment, I wanted to give people an overview of what FBT is. Let's see here. So first, the history. So FBT, or family-based treatment, was actually developed over in London at the Maudsley Hospital. And that's why for a long time it was called the Maudsley method. This was in the 70s and 80s. And it was really developed in response to the previous 100 years of treatment, where treatment had looked like a one-on-one. When we thought someone had an eating disorder, we would do what was called a parentendectomy, and we'd remove the parent from the child and just do therapy with the child. And we would do therapy with this either child or teenager or young adult, and we would try to convince them to like their body. We would try to motivate them to eat. We'd try to convince them to not binge and purge. And the family was left out. So in the 70s and 80s, they had this radical idea of, well, what would happen if we took the healthy people in a home environment and had them help the ill person get better? When you stop and think about it like that for just a second, it's hard to imagine any other illness where we'd be like, sick person, you take care of yourself all by yourself. Like, you got this. You drive yourself to chemotherapy and you take care of yourself when you get home and are exhausted. We don't do that for physical illness, really, ever. And in fact, we feel incredibly sad for our friends and loved ones if they need to get through a physical illness on their own, like during COVID, or if we don't live someplace where we can help them or do a meal train. And yet for mental illness, we expect people to get better all by themselves. And that's just not realistic. And it's actually not very kind. So they took this idea of family-based treatment that they pioneered in London. And in 2001, Doctors Locke and LaGrange published a manual on how to do family-based treatment. And shortly thereafter, they published a guide for parents, because they realized that telling therapists how to do it was one thing, but telling parents how to do it was also really helpful. And while not directly related to FBT, we saw a couple things start to happen after the publishing of this book. So the first was that the parent group Feast was born. So Feast is an excellent resource. And it's a group of family or people who support families who are all trying to help loved ones through an eating disorder. And the fact that it was formed is a little bit of a sign that maybe FBT on its own was really hard work, that parents needed support of some kind. And soon thereafter, we saw several different books founded. I just call out two here, Eva Musby's book and Dr. Lauren Mulheim's book, both publishing book for parents, helping to explain eating disorders and explain FBT. And this for me was kind of the first, I don't know if aha moment is a little too grandiose, but that wait, parents needed more than just FBT, that they were asking for these books to read. They were asking for these communities that Feast was providing. And they were having to kind of scrounge and find it themselves. I think it's already really hard being a parent, but the way that our mental health system is set up right now is that when your kid is sick, oftentimes you have to try to figure out how to diagnose them and then bring them to the anxiety specialist or the ADHD specialist or the eating disorder specialist. It's really tough. And then you have to sort through all the marketing to figure out what treatment to do. So that was a big part of why we founded Equip in 2019, is because we saw that there was a shortage of FBT trained providers. And we were seeing that a lot of people who needed treatment weren't able to find any treatment that was covered or networked by their insurance, even if it wasn't an FBT provider. A few other things about FBT. FBT has been evaluated in numerous randomized controlled trials. Hundreds of peer-reviewed publications have been published. And a lot of people, myself included, feel like it's been a little bit stuck in academic settings. You can't walk into any community and find 5 or 10 people doing FBT. In many cities and states, it's hard to find anyone at all. So what is family-based treatment? And we're not going to talk about family-based treatment this entire time, but I want to kind of use this as a foundation as we talk about ways for family to be involved. So the first aspect of family-based treatment is that it takes an agnostic view of the illness. So we do not spend time trying to figure out, where did the eating disorder come from? Was it something your dad said to you when you were 6? Was it something you learned at camp when you were 8? No, we take the time to focus on the present and what can we do right now. I'm going to make another cancer comparison. When someone gets sick with cancer, while it might be interesting to figure out how they got it, the most important thing is to take action now and start treatment. And so that's really, we don't spend time in treatment talking about the past. We figure out what's going on in the present. Once you're fully recovered, if you want to sit and talk about the past, we can definitely do it, but let's get to recovery first. FBT also takes an initial symptom focus. It prioritizes full nutrition and preventing eating disorder behaviors. I think about this a lot like you would never do therapy with someone while they are still drunk. You would wait for them to get sober and then you'd sit and do talk therapy. Well, in eating disorder treatment, a lot of people's brains aren't working as well because their brain is truly consumed by the eating disorder. I like to ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being all the time when you're awake and 1 being almost never, how often are you thinking about food? Usually they tell me a 9 or a 10. And how often are you thinking about your body? That's when I also hear a 9 or a 10. And then I ask them, how often do you want to be thinking about food? And how often do you want to be thinking about your body? And that's where I hear numbers that are more like 3, 4. And that discrepancy there, that is the brain being fully consumed by the eating disorder, similar to being drunk, and why it's very difficult to do one-on-one individual therapy with someone when their brain is being monopolized by the eating disorder. So what we want to do is make it difficult for people to act on their eating disorder urges. So for instance, if you had a 15-year-old and you thought that your 15-year-old was drinking alcohol or abusing alcohol, when your 15-year-old goes to soccer practice, then you should search their room. You should make sure that there's no alcohol under the mattress or hidden in the closet. You make it really difficult. Sorry about that. You should make it really difficult for them to act on their eating disorder behaviors. Act on their urge to use alcohol. The same thing is true if you think your child has an eating disorder. If you think that after dinner, your child is vomiting dinner, then after dinner, make it a rule. Hey, after dinner time, unlimited screen time, but you need to be where I can see you. No taking a shower after dinner, no being alone in your room. Which really goes to the next point, which is puts family in charge. And again, family is whatever family means to you. But we're taking the healthy people, the people who do not have an eating disorder, and putting them in charge of the things that are really hard when you have an eating disorder. So oftentimes when you have an eating disorder, you might have an urge to restrict or skip a meal or skip a snack. It's true for binge eating disorder. It's true for bulimia. It's true for anorexia. You know, this urge to skip meals and snacks. And so someone who doesn't have that urge, oftentimes a parent, they're going to be in charge of saying it's time to eat. And this is what you eat. And this is how much you're going to eat. Another thing that often happens when you have an eating disorder is that you go to sit down to eat and your mind starts going nuts, thinking about, should I eat this or should I eat that? Or how much of this should I eat? And you start calculating and you start overthinking. And it's just really, really hard because your eating disorder is so loud. So we take the people who don't have an eating disorder and put them in charge so that your brain can quiet down. And they decide, this is what you eat, this is when you eat it, this is how much you eat, at least in the beginning. The goal is to get the binging behaviors to stop, the purging behaviors to stop, the self-harm behaviors to stop, and if someone needs to restore weight, to restore them to healthy weight. As behaviors stop and as weight goes up for people who are on weight restoration, the brain starts getting free from the grips of the eating disorder, and then we can slowly give control back to the patient. One of my favorite things about FBT is it takes a really non-authoritarian stance. The therapist is an expert in eating disorders, period. You're not an expert in your family. You are an expert in your family. And as the expert in your family, we're going to tell you what we know about eating disorders and turn you into an eating disorder expert, because it would be impossible for me to be an expert in someone else's family. And then lastly, one of the key tenets of FBT is to externalize the illness. Oftentimes what we see is it ends up being parent versus teen, and they're fighting each other. That's because the teen and the eating disorder haven't really separated. We want to separate the teen from the eating disorder so the family can be united, parent and child or entire family, against the eating disorder. We do that by separating the patient from the illness. So while family-based treatment has the most evidence, so people call it an evidence-based treatment because it has the most evidence, there's many people that still need more. So 86% of patients see positive outcomes from FBT, which is wonderful. We want to figure out how can we help the other 14%. But even more importantly, about half of people with anorexia nervosa who do FBT achieve full remission, which means that there's another half that's still not receiving full remission. So what we did at Equip is we talked to, over the course of my co-founder, Christina Saffron, had spent the past 10 plus years at Project Heal, meeting thousands of patients and families. And I had spent the previous 10 years at UC San Diego, meeting thousands of patients and families. And we asked them, like, what more did you need? If you were part of the 50% where FBT didn't work, what more did you need? And that's what we did at Equip. We took FBT as a foundation and we built on top of it. So in FBT, family-based treatment, you traditionally meet with a therapist for 1 hour per week, and that's it. What we did at Equip is we brought an entire treatment team. So we give every single family a therapist, a dietitian. So a dietitian can help with so many different things. They can help with meal planning. If you're like me, I'm not much of a cook. I get kind of overwhelmed trying to figure out what I'm going to plan for my family to eat. So they can help come up with a meal plan. They can help you learn creative ways to make food more calorically dense. A lot of the kids that we treat have to eat about 4,000 calories per day every single day to gain 1 pound per week. Well, I need help with that. What is a 2,000 calorie diet look like? What's a 3,000 calorie diet look like? What's a 4,000 calorie diet look like? Is this putting nuts, peanut butter in smoothies? Is this putting avocado on the sandwich? What are some ways that, some things that I can do to help enhance the caloric and nutritional density of the foods that I'm serving? Dietitians also can really help with busting some of the myths that many people have been told. People join us having eliminated entire food groups or thinking that there's certain food groups that are harmful to them, when that's really not the case. And the dietitian can be there to provide really proper nutritional education. And while I'm sitting here telling you about what we do at Equip, I want you also to think that if Equip is not something that you need right now, or it's not something that's accessible to you, these are things you can also do without doing it with Equip. So if you have an FBT therapist, fantastic. But if you're treading water and your child hasn't been gaining weight or hasn't been having a reduction in their behaviors, maybe it's time to add to that FBT team, and a dietitian can be a great person to add to that team. Additionally, at Equip, we give everybody their own pediatrician, and if needed, a child and adolescent psychiatrist for medication management. So sometimes, even with wonderful treatment, it can be very helpful to go on medications to help with some of the symptoms, and essential to have a medical provider like a pediatrician who's monitoring the person with the illness to make sure that they stay medically stable, because eating disorders are the second deadliest of all mental health illnesses. We also provide all of our patients with a peer mentor. That's someone who's in recovery themselves, who has already recovered from an eating disorder. And they are there to help the patient stay engaged in treatment, to show them that full recovery is possible, and also to help with understandable treatment ambivalence. Sorry, someone raised their hand and I wasn't sure if they wanted to ask a question or not. And also help with understandable treatment ambivalence. So some people talk about eating disorders being egosyntonic. Other people call them self-eclipsing. It just basically means that oftentimes when you're depressed, you want to stop being depressed, or if you're anxious, you want to stop being anxious. But when people have eating disorders, sometimes they aren't ready to let go of their eating disorder. It's serving a purpose for them. So the peer mentor is there to help keep them engaged even when motivation is low. And lastly, at Equip, we provide every family with a family mentor. This is someone who's already helped their loved one through an eating disorder, and they can offer really practical advice, but also support their parents that are doing some of the really difficult tasks of helping their loved one recover from an eating disorder. We offer all of our patients unlimited sessions and between session messaging, along with unlimited skills groups. The reason for this is that, if you're seeing someone just for 1 hour a week, oftentimes you're on your best behavior when you're seeing someone for that 1 hour, but that's not where the eating disorder happens. So what we want is for you to go to your grandfather's 80th birthday and have there be a buffet of food and have you struggle and not have an urge to binge or have an urge to purge or have an urge to restrict, and reach out to your peer mentor, your therapist, your dietitian for help. Or as a parent, reach out to your family mentor and say, how should I guide my child through this? So that's why there's unlimited sessions and between session messaging, so that treatment is coming in where you need it most. If you're someone who's not doing equip, one way to incorporate this is talk with your providers about whether or not they will offer between session text messaging or different ways to structure that so that you can get support in vivo in the moment when it matters the most. At Equip, we adapt treatment to be fully virtual. I'm sure many of you have been doing this due to the pandemic. And while there's things that certainly are not so great about being fully virtual. So for instance, I can't see all of your faces, so I don't know if you've fallen asleep or not. And I think we're all spending way too much time on the screens. One of the benefits of being fully virtual is that it's a little bit easier to make treatment fit your schedule instead of making your schedule fit treatment. At Equip, all of our appointments are after 3:30 p.m. So if people want to be seen earlier, they certainly can. But I know that I'm never pulling my children out of school again now that they're finally back in person. I'm certainly not pulling my child out of school for a virtual appointment. It also gives us the ability to have, after school, evening, and weekend appointments. The other thing that I like so much about virtual treatment is it makes it easier to bring your village. My husband and I both work, and so one of my children, our children has anxiety, and if we both wanted to go to their in-person therapy session, we both have to drive and find parking. And that it can be difficult for two adults to do that. But with eating disorders, which are really tricky, it often helps to bring in your whole village. We see a lot of our families at Equip having not just two parents, but also maybe a step parent and an aunt and a grandma, people who are going to, and an uncle, people who are going to help with supervising meals or maybe be there after school when one of the other parents can't, or taking turns helping with cooking meals. Now, it helps to be able to bring that entire village to your sessions, and that can be done when it's virtually. People can call in. I lean so heavily on my brother and my sister-in-law and my mother, but I know that we all can, drop everything to drive to be at an appointment at 1 o'clock on a Tuesday. So even if you're not at Equip, I hope this is a little bit of a plug to continue to do some of your appointments virtually so that you can invite your whole village. Ask your sister to join you, ask your spouse to join you, ask your co-parent to join you, ask your parent to join you. The more people that attend, the more we create a true village or community for the people that are suffering, the more likely they are to recover. And lastly, we made it virtual because a lot of people don't have access to an eating disorder provider. They can't drive 30 minutes and be at an eating disorder provider, but being virtual helps us to better disseminate evidence-based treatment. Mentorship. So I talked a little bit about why mentorship is important for both the parents and for the patient. So at Equip, we give everyone a mentor. They're with them the entire way. If you aren't at Equip but would like a mentor, I really encourage you to check out different groups. So for instance, different parent groups that you have here through EDF, Feast has groups. Some of the other nonprofits are working on finding ways to have mentors and groups. I think it's really important for patients to have patient mentors who are fully recovered. So often in treatment, and my co-founder does a beautiful job talking about this, people make friends with people who are also sick. And that's really hard because sometimes you learn from other people with an eating disorder. Sometimes you compete with other people who have an eating disorder. And also it takes you away from your life. So for instance, we want our patients to be spending time socializing at soccer practice or socializing at Boy Scouts, not socializing with other patients who are currently sick. We want to make sure that they're building a life worth living. One thing that Equip has done that I hope we see more and more from other places as well is recognize that not everyone with an eating disorder is a thin white woman, but somehow we have a lot of thin white women who are serving as the providers for people with eating disorders. So we are working really hard at Equip to build diverse teams because we know that eating disorders affect everyone. To 40% of people who suffer are male. They affect people in all sizes, all shapes and sizes, definitely have a higher impact on the transgender community than we see on the non-transgender community. So we've made a point to make sure that we have providers that match the lived experience of the patients that we're and the families that we're serving. Just one thing for Equip, and this is something maybe you can look into if you can't join Equip, is eating disorders tend to rise when food insecurity rises. So people don't have reliable access to food. It can increase eating disorders. So here at Equip, we have things in place to make sure that people aren't food insecure, including hiring people who have been dietitians who work with people with SNAP benefits. They know how to meal plan and make grocery shopping lists using these SNAP benefits. So if you're someone who is struggling with eating disorder or your loved one is, I recommend getting a dietitian who has experience with SNAP benefits who can help you make the most of your benefits. Very, very briefly, our patients are getting better at EQUIP. And as you think about treatment for yourself or your own child, I think it's really important that you take the time to define what is better for your child. What does better mean for your family? It's very easy and sadly all too common for all mental health illnesses for people to tread water in treatment and things just stay the same. Oftentimes people feel good while they're in treatment for that 1 hour, but that feel good feeling doesn't leave after that hour is over. So the treatment feels good, but the treatment doesn't actually work. So it's really important that whether you're with EQUIP or you're someplace else, you think, what does better mean for my child? What does better mean for my family? And make sure that that's what's happening. For our families, better for a lot of them means weight restoration. 80% of our patients are on weight restoration. And of those, 96% of them are gaining weight on track, gaining an average of 1 pound per week. Better also means seeing an improvement in eating disorder symptoms. And also I say related symptoms. So not just binging, purging, restricting, but also maybe isolating from friends, self-harm. And our patients are seeing by 8 weeks, seeing about an 80% improvement in eating disorder symptoms. And then also very importantly is what does better mean for families? And when I talk to our family mentors, getting better for families often means being able to sleep through the night, not worrying as much about my child. So we do take the time to make sure we're measuring caregiver burden and also parental self-efficacy. Do you feel like you are able to help your child get better? One thing we hear often is this family a fit? Or in admissions, I often hear, having family involved in treatment makes sense, and that's just not going to work for my family. And there's a bunch of different people who think it's not going to work for their family and why they think it's not. But you know who's a candidate for family being involved? Everyone is a candidate for family being involved. We had this one parent who reached out to us and her child got sick and she wanted to do family-based treatment. And her pediatrician had said, listen, I don't think it's going to be a fit for you all because your spouse is dealing with a pretty severe chronic illness that you're helping him take care of. It's just going to be a lot for you to lead treatment for your kid and be involved. And so they sent their child away to residential treatment. Child got better. Child came back home. Child relapsed. Child went away. Child got better. Child came back home. Child relapsed. I think we've all heard of families that this has happened to before. And so the parent contacted us and said, listen, I know that I've been told that I'm not a fit for being involved in my kid's treatment because I've got a really busy job and my spouse is very, very sick and my spouse's full-time caregiver, but I want to give it a try. And you know what? It worked really, really well for them. Her child consistently gained 1.5 pounds per week until she was fully weight restored. And what she ended up doing is figuring out, how can I create a whole village? Who else is going to help me get my child better? She ended up involving a sibling, involving a neighbor, and involving a teacher. And all of them were able to attend sessions because it is virtual and it's arranged to fit your schedule. So if you or someone you know is thinking, I'm not sure if it's the right fit for me to be involved in my kids' treatment or involved in my loved one's treatment, I urge everyone to give it a try. And being involved can look lots of different ways. I'll skip through that there. Okay, so ways to involve family. First, participate, just be there. So being there in family therapy sessions. Sometimes it can be tempting to have just one parent attend a family therapy session. Bring more. If there are other parents, bring them. If they're co-parents, step-parents, bring them. Grandparents, aunts and uncles. The more people who attend, the more likely it is that caregiver burden will decrease and caregiver self-efficacy will increase and your child will get better. Attend any skills groups that you have access to. We really recommend DBT skills groups. It's really great to learn skills, not only to help your child, but to help yourself. As a parent, it is incredibly distressing watching your child be ill. It's incredibly distressing when your child is not engaging in pro-health behaviors. So you're trying to get them better, but they're fighting against you. It takes a lot of distress tolerance to help your child get better. So pick up some skills. Find some parent-only support groups. Realize that you're not alone. You're not the only person who's had a plate of food thrown at them, or your kids say that they hate you, or your child threatened to kill themselves if you make them eat that meal. Do family group meals, so do meal times with other families, and do phone coaching with the family therapist. So get some support in real time. This is what's happening. I need some help. Another ways for family to be involved is different ways for support. So this can be meal and snack supervision. So maybe you can ask your neighbor, I'm not going to be home after school. The kids usually let themselves back in. Can you be there to watch my child have their snack and make sure that it gets eaten? Or grocery shopping help. If your child is on weight restoration, trying to eat 3,000, maybe 4,000 calories per day to gain a pound a week, that's a lot of grocery shopping. See if you have a friend or a relative who can help you with grocery shopping or helping you with meal prep. And then learn. Invite all of the adults in your family, invite your best friend to join you for psychoeducation groups, for things like this, where you can learn more about eating disorders, watch DBT skills videos, read books for eating disorder education. Make sure that you are not the only person who is learning about an eating disorder. That's almost too much to bear. You are the only person helping your child through an eating disorder, and you're the only person in your family or your home that's an expert in it, and you have to maybe, let's say you're married, and so you're the experts. You have to tell your spouse what to do and tell your other child what to do. No, you don't need to do that. You can have them all learn with you, come to treatment with you, come to sessions with you. A couple additional resources. You can always reach out to Equip. We serve patients ages 6 to 24. We're a network with most major insurance providers. And so insurance covers all of our 5 or 6-person treatment team, the psychiatrist, the dietitian, the therapist, the mentors. The Eating Disorder Foundation offers amazing free weekly support groups. Attend those and get support. NEDA has a wonderful parent toolkit. And there's been a lot of great books written. These are two of my favorite. The first is by Dr. Lauren Mulheim. I believe it came out in 2018. When your teen has an eating disorder, practical strategies to help your teen recover. Really based on FBT principles, but has a lot of really practical advice on different things you can do to help your child. The other one that I like to recommend is called Decoding Anorexia. And while I know that it says anorexia, and there are still 4 or 5 other eating disorder diagnoses, what I like is that it talks about the neurobiology behind eating disorders. What we know from research is it's not that people don't want to eat, it's that their brains really aren't letting them. Or it's not that they want to vomit, it's just that their brain's making them. As an example, when you feel a 10 out of 10 sad, maybe someone has just died, maybe you've just gotten in a big fight, like think about the saddest you've ever felt. If you were to vomit, it would numb you out like that. If you were to self-harm, it would numb you out like that very, very quickly. And so the reason that people are engaging in eating disorder behaviors or other self-harm behaviors is because it works for them. And the book Decoding Anorexia helps talk a little bit about what's going on in the brain and helps us to kind of increase compassion for why they're engaging in these behaviors. And it's because they work. Whoopsies, I'm just going through the slides. But if you wanted to reach out to Equip, and we have a lot of resources and articles on our website as well, we're at www.equip.health. You can also call us or email us. We do free admission screens for eating disorders and also are happy to do free consultations as well if you just need some advice. We're available throughout the United States and are really grateful that you've all invited me here to talk tonight. I feel like I have spoken a ton, so I'm really eager to hear any questions that you have and answer as best as I can.
So much, Dr. Parks. Yes, I do have some good questions already for you, and we'll encourage if anyone has not typed into the chat any questions from all of that information we just went through, please go ahead and send those in. So I'm going to back up to the first question, which was about the, let's see, it was about the study that you were sharing in the beginning, as to asking the kiddos, right, the teens, whether they wanted their family members involved or not. We'd like a little more information about that study. So was this, in a particular, some of the demographics?
So those were all, should know it was my study. It was published in Dr. Leslie Anderson's book on eating disorders. She did a collection of different types of studies that were done. And I believe the kids were between the ages of 12 and 19 when they started their eating disorder treatment. The average age, I believe, was 15 and a half. And they were asked a variety of things. They asked, just kind of first point blank, do you want your parents to be involved in treatment? They all said no. And there was a slider, so they could say like kinda, no, they all said no. And then the next thing, I'll kind of turn a little bit there. Next thing they asked is, why do you not want your parents to be involved in treatment? And this is when we were hearing the things that kind of shocked us. I thought I was going to hear things like it wouldn't help, or it's none of their business, or they'll only make it worse. By and large, people said, and that's what they were saying to their parents. But what they took the time to say in the form was, it'll make my parents worried, or I'm embarrassed about how bad it's become and I don't want my parents to know, or I've already burdened them so much. I know that, they're not spending time with my little brother and sister because they're always having to worry or deal with my eating disorder. So a lot of it had to do with not wanting to burden their family members. We then asked them, so we asked the general question, do you want them involved in treatment? But then we also asked specific things like, well, what about in therapy? Well, what about in groups? Like we asked all these different ways, do you want your family involved? And the answer was no. So then at the end of after people had graduated from treatments, they'd finished PHP and IOP. So this happened at UC San Diego. So after they'd finished PHP and IOP, we asked them, okay, now how do you feel about your parents being involved? With the exception of one person, they said, I'm so glad my parents are involved. My relationship with them is better. I got better. I've stayed better. And I went to stay better. They also said it wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be, though most of them said it was hard and it was awful having my parents involved. And I'm so glad they were involved. It's like they're like, we got through this jungle together. So that was kind of the main take home messages. I would say about half of them did say that they wished their parents had gotten involved sooner, or wish their parents had gotten them help sooner. The other half had said things like, well, no, I think I needed to do it. I think that the timing was just fine.
Can you remind, I apologize if you did just share this. So was this mixed gender, all genders,
Yeah.
racial and ethnicity? Do you have any insight
on that?
Yeah,
it was mixed gender and mixed ethnicity. And we also know that, especially when we're kids, we're seeing a more homogenous group in treatment settings. And that's kind of one of the reasons we went and started Equip. So already it can take an average of 3 years for someone to get an eating disorder diagnosis. And that's if they're female and white and thin. If you aren't female, or you aren't white, or you aren't thin-bodied, it can take even longer to be diagnosed. And so we know that right now, a lot of our research really misrepresents the journey for white, thin females, cisgender females, I should say, and isn't necessarily representative of what it's like for other people. At Equip, we have about, I think, 11% of our patients are trans or non-binary. We know that eating disorders affect the trans and non-binary population about 5 times the rate of the rest of the population. And sometimes family issues can be particularly difficult in those situations. And so we have, we've made sure that we have trans and non-binary providers who really understand the complexities in family relationships that sometimes happen, and really encourage people to find whatever family means to them and bring in that family to help them recover.
Thank you. Yeah, you're bringing up so many important things, and I have a lot of questions. One, I want to kind of go back to, we're kind of talking about age, and one of the questions that we got from a family this evening is, how can a family show up and support with all this information, that you're providing and the evidence, right, that you're showing, when their loved one who is, over 18, able to, leave the house, kind of make their own decisions, right, and kind of secure that identity, which is such a big part of development anyways. So how can parents show up for their loved ones if their loved ones are like, hey, I don't want you to take charge and tell me what to eat and how much and this and that?
Oh, it's so difficult. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes it even more difficult is that it still works. Like having family be involved in treatment and even just FBT general still works when you're 22 just as well as it works when you're 16, but it's harder to get your child to buy in for it. So first thing is that if your child is not yet 18, start now, start now, start now. I see too many people say like, okay, we're going to do individual therapy first for a year. And then if it doesn't work, then I'll get involved. I'm like, but by then your child's 17 and a half. You don't have a ton of time before they turn 18. So start now. If your child is over 18, think about what leverage you do and don't have. So for a lot of people, it can be financial leverage. So sometimes eating disorders can get in the way of, finishing college or getting a job, and they end up needing to rely on their families for transportation, housing, tuition support. And so we've seen a lot of families have a lot of success using financial leverage. What that can look like is I care so much about you and your education, and I am worried about your health. And it doesn't matter that you have a bachelor's degree in political science if you are dead because of your eating disorder. And so we are not going to pay for you to continue working on your degree until you get help for your eating disorder. It is incredibly difficult when you no longer have any leverage over your child. And I think that I think in substance use, they've done a much better job of supporting parents through this, of parents who have adult children, and I can't force them into rehab, for instance, for their substance use disorder. And I've been really grateful for organizations like yours and Feast to being there for parents, because it's tough. So first, if I had some like magic words I can say that would get your 25-year-olds into treatment, I would say them and I tell you them. So I think broken record really helps. Look for areas where you have leverage, look for opportunities. I think something like, Equip or something similar to it can be really helpful. Sometimes just the virtual, like I'm not going to as a 32-year-old, I don't want to I'm not 32, but a 32-year-old, much older than 32. I'm not going to go, with my parent in person to a therapy session, but maybe I would let them zoom in and zoom into a session. So that's a place where you can use a little bit of leverage. Another is a technique that we call foot in the door. So I'm not trying to get into your whole hour-long session, but can I go for 15 minutes, right? And try to just keep trying to insert yourself in the recovery. I'm sorry that I don't have more for that. At Equip, we are going to be taking people above the age of 26 and going to still be incorporating family. And one of the things we're going to do is help patients figure out who that family is for them, who's going to be most helpful, and how to appropriately engage them.
Thank you. I know, difficult question, right? There really aren't a lot of straight answers. Even when we're looking at the evidence that we're, developing in this field. Yeah, and I just want to add to as well to that, to any families who are tuning in right now, to get connected with a support group. The Eating Disorder Foundation has 3 different support groups for family and friends each week, and that can be so helpful just to understand, you're not the only, families going through this, and you're not supposed to have all the answers already. So hearing from others and getting support can go an incredibly long way. Okay, I'm going to shift gears with questions. So a few came in kind of picking up on some DBT, some dialectical behavioral therapy in this family-based model. Some of the, the care and the structure and the skills group. So is this involved in Equip's model as well, or how is this similar? Can you speak on that a little?
Yeah. So Lucine Wazinski, I always mispronounce her name, out in Ohio, and over in Montefiore and out east, UC San Diego and a few other places have done this, of combining eating disorder treatment with DBT, including families with DBT. So I have to admit, I'm super biased because this is how I was trained, but also I love DBT skills. DBT skills are to help us through life, and life is going to have hopefully lots of moments of joy, but also tons of crap, if I can say that. It's not all roses. And so having a set of skills to help us through the hard times really helps. And I think actually this ties into this previous question of what do I do if I'm a parent of a 26-year-old or 28-year-old and I can't get them into treatment? I recommend you as a parent go and do some DBT skills. I don't mean for this to be inflammatory, but something I see a little bit of is I see parents who are really worried about their kids, who spend a lot of time reaching out to providers, learning about eating disorders, and that's all excellent. But they're avoiding doing the really, really hard thing, which is having hard leverage utilizing conversations with their child again and again and again. Like they're like, well, I talked to my child once about it. I'm like, right, but you called me 10 times, right? So like, what if you called your child 10 times and me once, right? So that's where DBT comes in. It takes a ton of distress tolerance and a lot of skills to get people to do things that part of their body doesn't want to do. And so I think that's where kind of DBT comes in. But yes, DBT is a big part of our eating disorder treatment. Definitely didn't invent it, learned it from all the awesome researchers that came before us. But what we recognize and what we heard from parents is, oh, it's so nice to have a tool belt with a couple different things that we can use.
Yeah, those hands-on skills.
Yes, yes.
Okay, next question. So a family has heard a lot about, or it sounds like has been encouraged to be involved as long as the family members are healthy family members. And we've got big healthy and big in quotations, sure. Right? Because and that's what the question is. Yeah, is like how how is that approached? When do we say like, okay, yes, okay, we want family members, and I appreciate that in the beginning you really explained and throughout that family is what we create it to be, right? So it might not be a biological parent, but somebody in my life could be an aunt, it could be a friend, it could be, you know, somebody that close to me. Yeah. So how do we say, yes, it's helpful to have this person here, or do we ever say, no, like this actually is maybe harmful?
Yeah, I'm going to give an example. So, I mean, especially coming out of COVID, I don't think any of us are feeling at our most healthiest right now, right? I think our anxiety is high, depression is high, people struggle with a lot of things. So we don't need anyone to be perfect in order to help their child through an eating disorder. We just need them to have a good enough relationship with food and know what they need to do and how to do it to help their child. Here's an example. We had this one really awesome family. It was parent, their ex, their new spouse, and their sister. So 4 adults all together doing family therapy. So this was fantastic because the first parent had their own business and was super busy. So sometimes they had, step parent help with meals. Sometimes other bio parent, a spouse helped with meals, and sometimes aunt, sister helped with meals. Well, once the child was sleeping over at the sister's house, and the sister gave her a couple sips of Mike's Hard Lemonade. And that was not a brilliant thing to do to a 15-year-old, especially when they are trying to recover from an eating disorder. And we know eating disorders and substance use disorders go hand in hand. The aunt was incredibly well-intentioned. And I think what would have happened in a brick and mortar setting is the parents would have come in and as providers probably would have said, no, that sister of yours could no longer be involved in treatment. She makes horrible decisions, right? And instead, because everybody was coming to family treatment, we were able to all talk with the sister about it and say, like, what were you hoping to accomplish with that? And here's some education so you know why that's not an okay thing to do. And they were able to kind of repair and heal together in session so that they could continue to have this village of 4+ people, adults helping them get better. So healthy, well, yeah, so there is I have a little sister who I'm sure has maybe done some things with my kids that I wouldn't have done, right? People make bad decisions and it happens, but no one needs to be perfect in order to help your child through an eating disorder. You just all need to be part of the same team, learning together. Even as a healthy parent, sometimes you're going to say the wrong thing. Sometimes you're going to throw the food right back at them, and maybe you shouldn't do that, but like, we're human. So don't get too hung up on who's healthy or not. If people are willing to help, have them help, and then train them on how to be good helpers.
Okay, next question. So is family-based treatment effective for all diagnosis of eating disorders?
There has been evidence that family-based treatment is effective for all diagnoses of eating disorders. And there's been ways that family-based treatment's been modified for all different diagnoses. So for instance, at Equip, about 15% of our patients have ARFID, that's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And we use family therapy as a foundation, just like we do for everything, but then we build on top of it. So there's a food hierarchy of what foods scare you the least to what foods scare you the most, as we slowly reintroduce foods to kids and teach parents how to do that food reintroduction. There's also focus on weight restoration using the foods that they already do eat. So there's exposure and response prevention, CBT, all these things are used on top of this foundation of family therapy. For bulimia, for instance, oftentimes when someone's struggling with bulimia or with binge eating disorder, they often have long periods of restriction. So we'll see someone restrict for 6, 8, 10, 18 hours, and then they have their binge and then sometimes have a purge after it. So that's where family intervention is really helpful. So maybe they don't need as much help plating the food, but what they do need help with is the parent saying, or the spouse saying, or the best friend saying, no, we're going to eat breakfast together right now. Let's sit down and eat breakfast together. And that doesn't look like it's enough. Like, why don't you give yourself a little bit more? So they might not be as prescriptive as we would see at the beginning of anorexia, but they're still there to help and make sure that things are happening. So I would say that family can play a role for all diagnoses. With FBT, there is some support for lots of different diagnoses, but at Equip, what we're doing is building on top of it. We ask people, when you're helping your child recover from bulimia, what was helpful about FBT and what do you wish you would have had? And that's how we're kind of building on top of it. And you can ask yourself that same question. It's okay to need more than what you're getting, and go ask for it and get it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Parks. We are wrapping up our hour, and I just wanted to allow if there's any other questions on the tip of anyone's minds to get those to me right now. Thank you so much for sharing all this information, which certainly can be overwhelming in a time, when a family is just stepping into how do I participate in supporting my loved one. So I just want to remind everyone that if you have questions further about Equip or any of the information that Dr. Parks reviewed today, to go ahead and send an email to Jessica Hickman. Her email was in the chat, and I can go ahead and paste that again, so she can answer more detailed questions such as insurance that's accepted, how a treatment model might work for you and your family, and also to look at the support group that the Eating Disorder Foundation offers. We have all of our support groups right now are also virtual, and we have support groups for individuals and for family and friend members. In addition, we also have mentorship programs that are going to look a little bit different than what was described by Dr. Parks. So there's really kind of this ongoing care for recovery.